you ever noticed how the sound of a ticking clock fills a room with a rhythm that feels almost alive? It's not loud, not obtrusive, but there is something about it that draws your attention if you let it. That ticking, if you think about it, isn't really the clock. It's the gears inside, moving in perfect synchronization. Gears are fascinating, aren't they? Tiny teeth interlocking, turning endlessly, like a miniature version of how we picture the Earth and Moon revolving around the Sun. The ticking becomes a kind of background music, constant and unchanging, making the passage of seconds. It's oddly comforting in a way, like the steady rhythm of footsteps on a quiet walk. If you sit in a completely silent room, the ticking becomes louder, almost demanding your attention. But the moment you start focusing on something else, it fades again, as if the clock knows when to retreat. Gears, those tiny mechanical wonders, have been part of human invention for centuries. From the water clocks of ancient Greece to the intricate watches of the modern era, they are quietly powered our ability to measure time. Think about the craftsmanship that goes into creating a watch. Each piece, no matter how small, has a purpose, and together they create something larger than themselves. And yet, a clock is only as meaningful as the moments it marks. The ticking is a reminder that time moves forward, whether we notice it or not. It's the same for life, quietly slipping by in the background, only noticed when we stop to reflect. The concept of gears reminds us of bicycles, with their own kind of precision engineering. Bicycles have been around for over a century now, quietly evolving from penny farthings to sleek carbon fiber machines. And yet, despite all the technological advances, the feeling of pedaling a bike down a quiet street in the early morning remains timeless. There is something meditative about the rhythm of cycling. The steady turning of the pedals, the gentle hum of tires on pavement, the way the handlebars respond to even the slightest movement of your hands. It's a simplicity that feels rare these days, when so much of life is complicated by screens and schedules. Bicycles aren't just modes of transportation, they are symbols of freedom. For a child, learning to ride a bike is one of the first tastes of independence. You remember that moment, don't you? The wobbly first ride without training wheels, the rush of wind in your face, and the sudden realization that you're doing it, moving forward on your own. And then, there's the way a bicycle connects you to the world around you. Without the barrier of glass or the hum of an engine, you hear the birdsong, feel the sun on your skin, and smell the freshly cut grass. It's a simple joy, one that feels timeless and universal. That quiet street might be lined with trees, each leaf trembling in the faintest breeze. Trees are curious things when you think about them. They don't move, yet they grow, reach out, and adapt. Their roots stretch deep into the earth, unseen but essential, much like the foundations of buildings we live in. A tree's life is one of patience. It starts as a tiny seed, almost insignificant, and over decades, even centuries, it becomes something vast and enduring. The rings inside its trunk tell stories of harsh winters, abundant rains, and everything in between. Each ring is a year, a memory etched in wood. The shade of a tree on a hot day feels like a gift. Sitting beneath its canopy, you can hear the rustle of leaves, a sound that's both soothing and ancient. Trees have seen so much, generations of people passing by, seasons changing endlessly. They remind us of how temporary our lives are, even as they persist. And yet, even trees have their vulnerabilities. A storm can uproot them, lightning can scar them, and yet many endure, growing around their wounds. There is a quiet strength in that, a reminder that growth often comes through resilience. Speaking of foundations, have you ever wondered about the concrete sidewalks we walk on? Concrete is essentially a mix of sand, gravel, water, and cement. It's odd how something so basic can become so durable. Sand itself, after all, is nothing more than tiny fragments of rock. Yet, put together, it builds cities. Concrete is everywhere, so much so that we hardly notice it. Streets, buildings, bridges, all owe their existence to this unassuming material. It starts as a liquid poured into molds and then hardens into something strong enough to support entire skyscrapers. It's a bit like life, really, shaped by the molds we pour ourselves into, hardened by time and experience. And then there are the imperfections. Have you noticed the cracks in the sidewalk? They are inevitable, caused by weather, pressure, and time. But sometimes those cracks become home to tiny plants, stubbornly growing where life seems impossible. There is something poetic about that, a reminder that even in the hardest places, life finds a way. Concrete may seem lifeless, but it carries the weight of our human stories. Each sidewalk has been walked on by countless feet, each crack a small piece of history. It's not just a material, it's a witness to life unfolding. Libraries are quiet places, filled with the smell of old paper and wood polish. The silence in a library has a particular weight, doesn't it? It's a space where even the faintest cough echoes. But it's not just silence. It's a silence filled with possibility, with the potential of thousands of stories waiting to be discovered. There is a ritual to being in a library. The way your footsteps soften as you step onto the carpeted floor, the gentle thud of a book being placed on a table, the quiet rustle of pages being turned. Time seems to move differently in the library. Minutes stretch out, unhurried, as if the clocks themselves are respecting the quietude of the space. Books in a library are like windows into other lives, other times, other worlds. A single shelf might hold ancient myths, modern thrillers, and everything in between. Each book represents countless hours of thought and effort, not just from the author, but from the editors and binders who brought it into existence. And yet, a library is more than its books. It's a refuge, a place where you can sit undisturbed and let your thoughts wander. In a world that's always moving, a library is a rare place where you are encouraged to pause, to think, to simply be. Birds are perhaps nature's most persistent background music. The chirping of sparrows, the call of crows, it all becomes part of the atmosphere so much so that we rarely stop to listen. Yet if you do pause, you will notice that each bird has its own song, its own rhythm, its own message. Take sparrows, for example. They're small, unassuming creatures, often overlooked, but their chirping is like a conversation, a constant exchange of signals and stories. Then there are larger birds, like geese, whose honking calls are a sign of changing seasons. Their V-shaped formations in the sky are a reminder of nature's order, its unyielding cycles. Bird migration is one of nature's greatest mysteries. How do they know where to go and when? Scientists say it's a combination of instinct, the position of the sun, and even the Earth's magnetic field. But even with all this knowledge, there is still a sense of wonder when you see a flock of birds heading toward the horizon, driven by something ancient and unexplainable. And then there is the joy of watching a single bird take flight. The way its wings beat against the air, the effortless glide, the sudden swoop. For a moment, it seems to defy gravity, reminding us of the freedom we often dream of, but rarely experience. Stars have been humanity guides for millennia, twinkling points of light in an otherwise endless void. They form constellations that have inspired myths and stories, like Orion the Hunter or Cassiopeia the Vain Queen. The vastness of space makes our world feel so small, doesn't it? Yet, it's that very smallness that makes life here so precious. The light from a star takes years, sometimes centuries to reach us. When you look up at night sky, you are seeing a snapshot of the past, a moment that has already happened. It's humbling to think that while we live our short lives, the stars persist unchanged for millions of years. Constellations are like celestial roadmaps, patterns we have imposed on the randomness of the universe. But beyond their shapes and stories, stars remind us of the infinite. For every star we see, there are countless others hidden from view, scattered across the cosmos. And yet, despite their distance, stars feel personal. They have been witnesses to our joys, our sorrows, our dreams. We make wishes on them, even knowing they can't grant them. Perhaps it's not about the star itself, but about the hope it represents. Shorelines are where land meets sea, constantly reshaped by tides and time. The boundary is never fixed, always shifting, as if the earth and water are in perpetual dance. You can stand on a beach watching the waves roll in and feel as if time itself has slowed. The sand beneath your feet is made of countless grains, each one a tiny fragment of rock, shell, or coral. Every grain has a story, shaped by erosion, carried by currents, and deposited here. It's strange to think that something as solid as rock can be broken down into something so fine and soft. The waves, too, tell a story. They begin far out at sea, stirred by winds and storms we might never see. By the time they reach the shore, they've traveled vast distances, carrying with them the energy of the ocean. The sound of waves breaking is like a heartbeat, steady and soothing, a reminder of the planet's own rhythms. There's the horizon, where the sea meets the sky. It's always just out of reach, no matter how far you walk. There is something poetic about that, a reminder that some things are meant to be pursued, not captured. Weeds are resilient, often dismissed as nuisances despite their tenacity. Dandelions, for instance, scatter their seeds with the help of the wind, which is another wonder of nature. Wind, though invisible, shapes landscapes, moves clouds, and powers turbines. Imagine the path of a single dandelion seed carried away by a sudden gust. It floats, weightless, traveling far beyond where it began. It might land in fertile soil or on a barren concrete, but wherever it falls, it carries the same determination to grow. It's a quiet kind of persistence, unnoticed, yet unstoppable. Wind, too, has its own quiet persistence. Over time, it carves canyons, shapes dunes, and sculpts the surfaces of the rocks. It's a force we cannot see, only feel. A gentle breeze on a hot day is a kind of relief, while a strong gust can take your breath away, literally shifting the way you stand. And then there is the sound of the wind, whether it's rustling through the leaves, whistling past a window, or howling during a storm. It's a voice of nature, always present, yet always changing. It reminds us of the unseen forces at work in the world, shaping it in ways we often take for granted. Turbines are symbols of renewable energy, capturing the raw power of nature and turning it into electricity. Electricity itself is so ordinary now, yet not long ago it was a novelty. The simple act of flipping a switch and watching a bulb glow is still magical when you really think about it. Before electricity, light came from fire. Candles, oil lamps, and hearth. These sources were warm and flickering, but limited and fragile. Now, with a single wire and a filament, we have a light that is steady, reliable, and instant. It's so commonplace that we forget how transformative it is. And yet, light is more than just a utility. It shapes our moods, our routines, and our perceptions. A brightly lit room feels different from one bathed in soft, warm light. The glow of a street lamp at night creates a sense of safety, while the sharpness of fluorescent bulbs in a store keeps us alert. Think about shadows too. They are companions of light, always present, but often unnoticed. A shadow shifts as the light source moves, creating patterns that are both predictable and unique. Even in darkness, light leaves its mark, shaping the world in subtle ways. Bulbs, whether incandescent or LED, illuminate our lives, casting light into the darkest corners. But before bulbs, there was fire, the primal force that gave humanity its first taste of control over nature. Fire is fascinating, isn't it? Both destructive and life-sustaining. It's a paradox of energy. A single spark can ignite an inferno, consuming everything in its path. Yet, that same spark, contained and controlled, can warm a home, cook a meal, or forge metal into tools. Fire, for all its power, depends on three simple elements: heat, fuel, and oxygen. Remove any of them, and it fades away. The ashes left behind after a fire tell their own story. They are what remains when all else is consumed, a reminder of both the fire's intensity and its impermanence. But those ashes are not merely remnants, they are nutrients, feeding the soil and allowing new life to grow. And there is something mesmerizing about watching a flame dance. The way it flickers and shifts, never still, yet always anchored to its source. It's a living thing in a way, a reminder of the balance between creation and destruction. Soil, with its unseen ecosystem of microbes, is the foundation of all terrestrial life. Worms burrow through it, aerating it and making it fertile. Worms, those simple creatures, are vital to the planet's health, much like bees are to pollination. Think about a single handful of soil. It might look like plain dirt, but it is teeming with life. Microorganisms break down organic matter, turning it into nutrients that plants can absorb. Worms tunnel through it, creating pathways for air and water. Even the smallest creatures play a role in the grand cycle of life. Worms are particularly fascinating. Blind and voiceless, they work tirelessly, recycling decaying matter into rich, fertile soil. They remind us that even the humblest of creatures can have an outsized impact. Without worms, the earth would be less fertile, less alive. And then there is the texture of soil, the way it crumbles between your fingers. It holds the promise of growth, of seeds sprouting and roots taking hold. It's a reminder that life begins in the simplest places, often unseen, but always essential. Balance is a theme that extends beyond nature. It's in architecture, music, and even in our daily routines. Too much of one thing can overwhelm, while too little leave us wanting. Take music for instance. A melody needs both high and low notes, fast and slow rhythms to be truly captivating. In architecture, balance is both aesthetic and structural. A well-designed building feels harmonious, its elements working together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. Even in ancient structures like the pyramids or temples, there is a sense of balance, a symmetry that feels timeless. In our lives, balance is harder to find. We juggle work and rest, ambition and contentment, noise and silence. It's a constant adjustment, like walking a tightrope. Yet when we find that balance, even for a moment, there is a sense of peace that's hard to describe. And just like nature, balance isn't static. It shifts and changes, requiring us to adapt. But perhaps that's what makes it so valuable, the fact that it's something we must continually strive for, a journey rather than a destination.